Have you ever walked into a room and felt with absolute certainty that you did not belong there? Not because anyone said so, but because every single detail of the place was designed for someone else? That was Lily Greer at the Hargrove wedding. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd said so, clearly, twice to her friend Dana, who had ignored her both times and handed her a black dress that was slightly too formal for who Lily was and slightly too plain for where they were going. Dana worked in event coordination and had an extra seat at her table. "You've been eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row," Dana had said. "Come eat real food." So Lily came for the salmon. The Hargrove estate sat on the edge of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the kind of property that didn't announce itself with a gate so much as suggest, very quietly, that you were now in a different category of existence. The driveway alone was longer than the street Lily grew up on. Inside, the ceilings were high enough that the chandeliers looked like something fallen from orbit, and every surface reflected light in a way that made Lily feel she was standing inside someone else's photograph. She was 26 years old. She taught 2nd grade at a public school in Wicker Park and drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror she kept meaning to fix. She did not belong here. She had made her peace with that fact approximately 4 minutes after walking through the door. Dana disappeared almost immediately. Something about a seating chart emergency, leaving Lily alone near the edge of the cocktail reception with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't asked for and no clear social objective. She watched people greet each other with the ease of those who had been orbiting the same expensive circles for decades. Air kisses, inside jokes, the comfortable shorthand of old money. She found a quieter corner near one of the tall windows and stayed there. Outside, the lake was going dark in the early evening light, and she watched it because it was the most honest thing in the room. She didn't notice the man until he was already standing 2 feet to her left. He wasn't loud about it. That was the first thing. He didn't announce himself the way most men at events like this did. No drink raised in a vague toast, no practiced opener. He simply stood there, also looking at the lake, as if he'd made the same calculation she had and arrived at the same window. His name, though she didn't know it yet, was Calloway Ashford. He was 41. He wore a dark suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who don't need to try, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was quiet in the manner of someone for whom silence had long since stopped being uncomfortable. Lily didn't look at him directly. She was doing the thing she always did in unfamiliar social situations, cataloging the room, tracking the exits, keeping her glass in her right hand so she had something to do with her left. "You're doing the math," he said. She turned. He was still looking at the lake. "Sorry, you've looked at the main door 3 times in the last 4 minutes. He paused. "And the side corridor twice." Lily stared at him. "That's either very observant or very concerning." "Occupational hazard," he said, and something in his voice was almost amused, though his face didn't show much of it. "What's your occupation?" He finally looked at her. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind that didn't move when they landed on something. "Development," he said. She decided not to ask what kind. She went back to looking at the lake. He stayed. Neither of them spoke for a while, which should have been strange, but wasn't. Somehow, it had the quality of 2 people who'd both found the one quiet corner of a loud party and reached an unspoken agreement not to ruin it. Then, the waiter came through with champagne. Lily reached for a glass without really thinking, and the waiter's tray caught a cluster of people moving behind him, and the whole thing went sideways. Glass, tray, momentum, and a full flute of champagne went directly down the front of Calloway Ashford's jacket. The sound it made was very small. The silence that followed was not. Lily watched it happen in the particular slow-motion way of unavoidable disasters. The champagne soaked into the dark fabric. A woman nearby gasped as if something structural had collapsed. 2 men in her vicinity turned with expressions calibrated somewhere between horror and social excitement. "Oh my God," someone said, and it wasn't about the jacket, it was about who the jacket belonged to, and that told Lily everything she needed to know about the room. She looked at the jacket. She looked at the man wearing it. She said nobody died. Calloway Ashford looked down at his jacket. Then he looked at her. "The jacket's Italian," offered one of the men nearby helpfully. "Then it's probably survived worse," Lily said. The woman who had gasped was staring at her with an expression that cycled rapidly through disbelief, offense, and something approaching social alarm. "Do you know who?" "It's fine," Calloway said. His voice was flat and final in a way that closed the subject like a door shutting. The small crowd that had materialized dispersed, slowly, reluctantly, like people leaving a scene they'd hoped would be better. Lily turned to him. "I'm sorry about the jacket, for real. I'll pay for the cleaning." "You won't," he said. I absolutely will. I'm a second-grade teacher, not a person without a functioning conscience. Something happened in his expression then, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, something shifting underneath. A second-grade teacher, he repeated. Yes, at the Hargrove wedding, my friend had an extra seat. She paused. I came for the salmon. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that felt like he was cross-referencing something, checking her against a list of things he understood about the world. Lily, she said, and extended her hand, because it seemed like the right thing to do. Calloway, he said, and shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and he didn't make it a statement. She excused herself shortly after. Dana had resurfaced with a look on her face that suggested the seating chart crisis had been resolved and there was food available. And Lily was genuinely still interested in the salmon. She didn't look back at the window. She didn't see him watch her go. Dana called her 3 days later. Okay, so, Dana said, in the voice she used when she was trying to figure out how to say something. You know that man you were talking to at the Hargrove thing? By the window? Lily was grading spelling tests. She drew a small star next to a correctly spelled necessary and said, The one whose jacket I champagned? Yes, that one. What about him? Do you know who he is? Lily put down her pen. He said development. Lily. Dana's voice went through several registers in just her name. That's Calloway Ashford. The name landed and then kept landing, the way names do when you suddenly understand they carry weight you weren't previously accounting for. Calloway Ashford. She'd seen the name on buildings. On the business section of the Tribune, on a charity gala program that had come through as a donation request to the school. The real estate? Yes, Dana said. But also, Lily, there are things people say about how he made the first part of his money. Lily was quiet. People say a lot of things, she finally said. They do, Dana agreed carefully. I just thought you should know. Lily went back to her spelling tests. She gave a small star to rhythm and a gentle correction to believe, and she didn't think about Calloway Ashford and his dark, steady eyes and the lake going silver behind him. She didn't think about him. She almost managed it. She encountered him again 11 days later, at the kind of event she had no business attending, but had been pulled into by the same gravitational force as the first time. Dana, a last-minute favor, a venue that needed warm bodies to fill the back rows of a fundraiser for a children's hospital foundation. She saw him before he saw her. He was across the room, talking to 2 men whose body language communicated clearly that they were interested in what he had to say. He was listening more than speaking, which she noticed because it was unusual. Most men in rooms like this performed authority through volume. Calloway Ashford performed it through stillness. He found her 20 minutes later. Not by accident, she thought. There was nothing accidental about the way he moved through a room. You're tracking exits again, he said. You're tracking me, she said. A pause. I noticed you when you came in. Why? He considered this with more seriousness than the question probably warranted, which she was beginning to understand was just how he approached things. You looked like the only person in the room who had somewhere better to be. I had papers to grade, second grade, second grade. He signaled a passing waiter. Not aggressively, just a slight angle of his wrist. The ease of a man who had never in his adult life needed to wave for attention, and 2 glasses of sparkling water appeared. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. How do you know I don't want champagne? She asked. You had water last time. She took the water. You notice a lot. It's useful, he said. Must be, she said, for development. His mouth curved. Not a full smile. She was starting to think full smiles weren't something he did in public, but something real which was different. You looked me up, he said. Dana told me. And she thought about how to answer. She was not by nature a person who softened things unnecessarily, which was either a character strength or a social liability depending on the situation. And I think development is probably a fairly generous description of some of what you do. The curve in his mouth didn't disappear. If anything, it sharpened slightly. That's direct. I teach 7-year-olds. I don't have a lot of patience for euphemism, and yet you're still standing here. She looked at him. He looked back. The room moved around them at its usual pace, glasses clinking and voices layering, and neither of them moved. I'm still standing here, she agreed. She didn't know exactly what she meant by it, but she didn't leave. He called her 4 days after that. She didn't ask how he'd gotten her number because she suspected the answer would be either boring, Dana, or unsettling. Everything else about Calloway Ashford, and she wasn't sure which outcome she was hoping for. There's a dinner, he said without introduction, which she was also starting to understand was just how he communicated. Thursday? I'd like you to come. I have school Friday morning. It'll be done by 10. That's not actually a reassurance. 8:30 then. She was quiet for a moment. She was standing in her apartment kitchen, which was small and had a window that looked out onto a brick wall and a fire escape where she kept a pot of herbs that were perpetually half dead. She looked at the herbs. The basil was doing okay. The rosemary had seen better days. "What kind of dinner?" she asked. "The kind where you sit across from me, and I can ask you things without a fundraiser happening in the background." She thought about the lake going dark through the window. She thought about the way he'd said nobody died back at her, not repeating it but acknowledging it. The recognition that she'd said something and he'd heard it. "What kind of things?" she asked. "Whatever kind you're willing to answer." She looked at the rosemary. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what world you move in," she said. "I need you to know that." "I know," he said, "and I'm not interested in being managed, or handled, or kept in a careful box where I only see the version of things you decide I should see." A silence. Long enough that she started to think she'd said too much, or the wrong thing, or... "Lily," he said. "What?" "I'm not calling you because you're easy to manage." She closed her eyes for a second. The basil rustled in some draft from the window. When she opened them, she said, 8:30. "But I'm driving myself." "I expected that," he said. The dinner was at a place she'd never been. Small, unmarked from the street, the kind of restaurant that existed entirely through referral and the confidence of people who already knew about it. The menu had no prices. She noted this and said nothing about it. He was there when she arrived, which she'd half expected him to be. She had a developing sense that Calloway Ashford was rarely the last to arrive anywhere. He stood when she came in, not performatively. It seemed like reflex they ordered. He asked her about her students, with the focused attention of someone who actually wanted to know, not someone filling time until the conversation turned to themselves. She told him about a boy named Marcus who had recently decided that all his drawings needed to include at least one rocket ship regardless of the assignment, and about a girl named Priya who'd informed Lily last Tuesday that bees were more important than people, a position Lily had found difficult to argue with. Calloway listened. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look at the room. She found this disorienting in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "You didn't grow up with money," he said at some point during the main course. She looked at him. "No, where?" "Rockford. My mom worked the pharmacy counter at Walgreens for 22 years. My dad drove a delivery truck. She paused, not because it was painful, but because she was choosing the right word. Fine. We were fine people with a fine amount of money, and it was enough. But you notice when you're in rooms where other people have more. Doesn't everyone?" "No," he said simply. "A lot of people stop noticing. They get comfortable." "Is that a warning?" He looked at her steadily. "Possibly." She pushed a piece of fish around her plate. "What about you? Where'd you grow up?" "South Side," he said. "Bridgeport." She looked up. "My father was a numbers man," Calloway said, and left enough space after that for her to understand what he meant. "He was competent at it, careful. He kept his head down, and it kept us fed, and I watched him keep his head down my entire childhood, and I decided very early that I was not going to do that. So you raised yours. So I raised mine. And some people got hurt." He didn't flinch. "Yes." She set her fork down. "I'm not asking you to apologize to me. That's not what this is. I just need to know you'll be honest about what it is." "I'm honest about most things," he said. "It's more efficient." Most things, he agreed, and didn't elaborate, which she understood was itself a form of honesty. She picked her fork back up. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in October. Cold coming off the lake, the streets lit amber and blue. She thought about Dana saying there are things people say. And she thought about the way Calloway had stood at that window like he'd been standing at windows his whole life watching. "I'm going to ask you something," she said. "Go ahead. And I want a real answer, not a managed one. I've already told you. I know what you told me. I'm saying I want to know, is this whatever this is it because of the champagne? Because I said nobody died and didn't look at you the right way? Because if this is just novelty, or some version of collecting an unusual thing, Lily, then I'd rather know now than..." "Lily." She stopped. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and looked at her with those dark, steady eyes that didn't look away. "The night of the Hargrove wedding," he said, "there were 47 people in that room. I had a read on most of them inside 15 minutes. I know that sounds," he paused, "like something a person says to sound impressive. But that's not why I'm saying it." "Then why are you saying it?" "Because in 47 people you were the only one I couldn't quite read, and I've been trying to figure out why for 2 weeks." She was quiet. "That's not novelty," he said. "I've been in rooms with interesting people my entire life." "That's not," He seemed to search for the word with more care than she expected. This is not the same thing. The restaurant was quiet around them, the particular muffled quiet of places that cost a lot and know it. She looked at him across the table. This man with his South Side father and his raised head and his reputation that occupied its own section of Chicago legend, and she thought, I should probably be more afraid of this than I am. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm not done being skeptical. I'm going to keep being skeptical. I want you to know that up front. I'd expect nothing less, he said, and I drive myself home. You mentioned, and I'm not telling my students' parents that she gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. What is this? He asked. Genuine question, not a challenge. She thought about it. 2 people at a window, she said finally, figuring out if there's more. He nodded, slowly, like someone filing something important. That's enough for me, he said. The more came gradually. Not in the way of romantic comedies, all grand gestures and public declarations, but in the way of real things. Incrementally, sometimes awkwardly, with setbacks that felt like setbacks and not like plot points leading inevitably somewhere better. There was the night she met 3 of his associates at a dinner she hadn't been told would be a dinner with associates, and she'd been quiet for most of it and deeply furious in the car afterward. And Calloway had said, I should have told you, without deflection or excuse, and she'd said, yes, you should have, and that had been the whole conversation. And somehow it had been enough. There was the Tuesday he showed up at the school. Not inside, just at the edge of the parking lot, having remembered she had a staff meeting that ran late. And she came out at 7:15 to find him leaning against a completely nondescript car, which she suspected was borrowed for the occasion because it was the most civilian vehicle she'd ever seen him near. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was in the area. Calloway, you were in Wicker Park. I said what I said. She laughed. She hadn't expected to, and it came out a little louder than she intended, and he watched it happen with an expression that she was only starting to be able to read. Something open. Something that didn't usually show on a face trained to stay closed. There was the Saturday she went to a neighborhood she didn't know, and met a woman named Loretta who turned out to be his mother, and understood within 4 minutes that the entirety of Calloway Ashford's considerable capacity for attention and careful listening had come directly from this woman who had spent 40 years making sure the people she loved felt seen. She talks about you, Loretta told her, while Calloway was in another room, which was clearly the exact window Loretta had been waiting for. He doesn't talk, he never talked, he summarizes. He gives me the version he thinks I need. She looked at Lily. But he talks about you. Lily didn't know what to do with that, so she looked at her hands. He told me you said nobody died when you spilled champagne on him, Loretta said. I didn't spill it, technically, the waiter. He told me he laughed, Loretta said. In the car after. He told me he got home and he laughed. There was a night in February, cold the way only Chicago February can be cold, the kind of cold that has opinions, when they were sitting in his apartment, which was large and spare in a way that felt like a deliberate refusal of excess, and she was reading and he was working, and neither of them needed to fill the room with sound, and she thought, oh, just that, just oh, the particular oh of realizing something has already happened, that you've been inside it for a while without noticing, that you're not approaching a thing but standing in the middle of it. She looked up from her book. Calloway was looking at his papers but not reading them. She could tell because he made a small sound, the sound of someone whose thoughts have drifted somewhere else. What? She said. He looked up. Nothing. Calloway. He set the papers down, looked at her with that steady, careful attention that had unsettled her the first time, and now felt like the most familiar thing in the world. I've been trying to figure out, he said slowly, how to tell you something without it sounding like the kind of thing I don't usually say. She closed her book. Just say it. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in rooms with a lot of people, he said. Spent most of my life learning how to read them, what they want, what they'll do. He paused. It's a skill, but it's also a habit, a defensive one. I know, she said. I don't want to do that with you. I keep stopping myself from doing it with you, and that's new. She looked at him. What I'm trying to say, he said, is that I'm not sure I know how to do this the regular way. I don't know what I look like when I'm not managing something, but I'd like to find out if you're interested in Calloway, being patient while Calloway. He stopped. She walked across the room and sat beside him on the couch and looked at him from close up. This man who had raised his head in the South Side and never put it back down, who watched exits and tracked rooms and still showed up in her parking lot at 7:15 on a Tuesday. I'm a second-grade teacher, she said. I have infinite patience. It's literally in the job description. Something happened to his face then, all of it, at once. Not a smile but a release, the expression of a person who has been holding something careful for a very long time and has just finally set it down. And in the cold of Chicago February, in a spare apartment where nobody was performing anything for anyone, Lily Greer decided that some rooms you walk into and feel entirely out of place, and some rooms, with the right person, gradually start to feel like they were always going to be yours.